Did you know that there are over 15,000 MarTech tools on the market now? That is a 9% increase from last year. Every year, I think it can't possibly keep going up. There's just no way. And then every year, it does. But here's the thing. Most companies with 10 or more tools only use 5 or fewer of them on a weekly basis. So it's pretty clear that when it comes to tools and technology for marketers, more is not necessarily better, but it's often seems easier. Because when we're faced with the choice between changing the deep-seated ways of working that have governed our marketing department for the last decade, or just signing an SOW for a bunch of new seats in this shiny new piece of software, a lot of us are gonna pick the SOW for the new piece of software. And now in the age of AI, where everything is AI native or AI powered or has a sweet and juicy AI center, all of this is just getting worse. So it is now time for some real tool talk. Because if you're not being vigilant, your MarTech stack might actually be making your process problems worse, not better. So let's explore. Welcome to the Agile Marketing Edge, the first podcast dedicated to turning Agile theory into real-world marketing breakthroughs. I'm Andrea Fryrear, CEO of Agile Sherpas, and your guide on this climb to smarter, faster, outcome-driven marketing. Every week, we unpack the what, who, and how behind Agile marketing. From building high-velocity workflows and slashing waste to measuring what really matters and scaling success across teams. You'll hear quick hit strategies you can deploy today, plus candid stories from marketers who have traded chaos for clarity and never looked back. Hit follow wherever you listen, and let's carve the next switchback together. All right, I want to start out by telling you a kind of scary story about marketing technology that I have seen play out way too many times. There's a problem in a marketing organization. It might be that work is taking too long, or that collaboration has stalled, or that stakeholders are frustrated. It doesn't matter. There's a problem, and technology is seen as the solution. And people pay absurd amounts of money for sometimes hundreds of seats in these insanely expensive tools. And it's a multi-year agreement. But there's no rollout plan and there's no fundamental change to the way that people work to go along with this tool that it was supposed to fix this really gnarly operational problem. And so you get like 2 years into a 3-year agreement and everyone is furious because 2/3 of these really expensive seats are still not being used. And so now the people who paid sometimes millions of dollars for these seats are trying to cancel this huge contract. Well, the vendor is now freaking out because they don't want to lose this multi-million-dollar contract. So they start throwing consultants and professional services at the account trying to figure it out. Well, now there's this haphazard rollout. Absolutely no fundamental changes have happened. And maybe the seats actually get used. And now we have this like surface level use of the tool. And everybody knows it's not going to stick. And I guess sometimes the seats are used, but another year or two, and we're just going to churn that tool. It's going to get canceled. We're going to pick another tool, and the whole cycle starts again. And this is a terrible, terrible cycle to be in because it makes everybody resistant to any kind of meaningful change, whether it's tools or processes or anything, because we all think we're just going to have to wait it out no matter what it is, and we don't actually have to fundamentally change. And when we start blending in an overall sense of churn in the marketing technology landscape, things just start to get a little more uncertain, because in 2025, 1,211 tools came off of the MarTech landscape, either because they shut down altogether or they were acquired and merged with another tool. And then 2,489 new ones came on to the landscape. So overall, that's 8.6% churn across the entire landscape. So there's a lot of just stuff happening. So we need to be careful on how we approach marketing technology, because think about how much time we spend on tool adoption, right? We are going to research tools. Just even with our good friend AI in the mix now, where we can ask questions and get a lot of comparison data a whole lot faster than we used to be able to, we still have to do some due diligence and go and test these things out. And then we're going to sit in demos. You're not going to buy a piece of technology sight unseen. You're going to sit through a demo, and then your team is going to need to discuss and debate, and everybody's going to have an opinion about features and benefits, and is it really going to solve the problem? And some people are going to think it's this one, and some people are going to think it's that one. And we're going to make the spreadsheets and debate the pros and cons and all of that fun stuff. And then somebody's going to like the expensive one, or we're going to have to advocate for more budget. And then once we pick one, we're going to have to train everybody on the tool, and that's a whole thing. And again, AI makes some of this easier, but not a lot of it. We still have to learn how to use these tools if we want to get the bang for our buck. We're going to have to sit in these training classes to make these investments worthwhile. And eventually, people get fatigued. We have change fatigue, we have tool fatigue, so that even when we find something that's really, really good and might actually be the answer and be the solution to a really serious problem, people are not going to believe it. It's very like the boy who cried wolf situation, where once the wolf is actually around, nobody believes it because there's too many times saying the wolf was there and the wolf wasn't there, right? This is it. This is the piece of MarTech that's going to save us, that's going to make us more productive, that's going to make us more effective. And it didn't too many times, so that when finally the real deal comes along, nobody's going to believe it because we've cried wolf too many times. And there are really good tools out there, and actually the tool quality overall is getting better. The average product rating of MarTech tools rose from 4.36 in 2023 to 4.42 in 2025 on G2. So yes, more tools are out there, and generally, right, new tools are kind of still feeling out the market and getting their feature set dialed in. So you would think new tools might be dragging down the overall ratings. So despite the explosion in new tools, the overall rating is going up. So there are great tools out there. We don't want to waste our political capital and introduce change fatigue into our team by constantly churning through tools when we don't have to. So what matters is choosing fewer, better integrated tools that match up to our real needs, and then being disciplined about retiring the tools that are underutilized. Remember the stat from the top of the show that If you have 10 or more things in your MarTech stack, you probably use less than half of those on a weekly basis. It is almost certainly time for an audit right now. There are probably things that can come out of your stack so that you can make room for other things, or maybe you don't need those things. There's a lot of potential for consolidation so that we can save up our change efforts for tools or just process improvements that are actually going to make a difference. And there are a lot of these kinds of things. I mean, we talk about process improvements constantly on this show. There are just so many, right? We talk about them every single week. There are innumerable ways that you can improve your process. And with AI changing technology on practically an hourly basis, we need to be able to have people willing and ready to adopt those pieces of technology as they roll out and not be so jaded by botched rollouts. And the data is very clear on these areas of opportunity as well, especially in areas that have historically sucked up tons of time and brain power and generally like the souls of marketers, right? Repetitive things like scheduling social content, follow-up emails, lead scoring and qualification. These can be increasingly handled by automation and just free up our capacity. The HubSpot updates that were announced at Inbound a couple of weeks ago, right? This is just becoming increasingly accessible across all kinds of tools and technology, right? And so, for example, right, 74% of marketers are saying that they are already saving time through the automation of repetitive tasks to the tune of more than 6 hours per week, according to some studies. That's almost an entire work day that we are getting back thanks to these kinds of savings. And then there's a Thomson Reuters study, the Future of Professionals report, where people are saying they expect that they could free up 4 hours a week using AI within the next year, and that could get as high as 12 hours per week in the next 5 years. So these tools are really important to modernizing our roles, but it is very easy to get these rollouts wrong, and we cannot expect the tools to solve everything, right? We've talked on this show already about how AI is best used as a scalpel, not a sledgehammer, right? And this is very much that same kind of situation. We don't want to just brute force apply it across every part of the system or our processes. We're talking very much here about repetitive, mundane activities. That is where the real opportunity is here. That's what we're talking about, time savings. That's where we want to focus our efforts. And that is where we want to leverage these change opportunities. We don't want to go and ask for tons of change across every single part of the workflow and introduce change fatigue. We have a limited amount of change willingness on our team. Don't want to exhaust it immediately and then not have it available when we really need it. So, what are some best practices that we can exercise in order to make this work in our favor? First and foremost, think about your process first, and then the tools second. Because if you have a really serious, deeply rooted process problem, or maybe even a people problem, buying a new tool or creating a new role is not going to solve that problem. I have seen this happen so many times. There is a fundamental communication issue between marketing and another part of the business. Usually it's like the most important business unit in an organization. And there's just a broken line of communication. The leader of the BU and the marketing leadership don't get along for whatever reason. And somehow the go-to solution is to hire a something manager. It's a relationship manager or a project manager or a something manager to act as the go-between between these groups. The creation of this role is somehow supposed to magically mend this broken relationship. It will not, right? Nor will a brand new workflow visualization or project management tool magically make that line of communication flow. This is a people level problem that's going to have to be solved amongst those humans. So you have to go to the root of the problem and solve it there. So hiring another person or putting a tool on top of the problem sometimes is just going to make it worse. So think about what's really wrong and whether a tool is going to fix it. So go in at the process or people level first and make sure that that is all solid before you start trying to put technology on top of it. First and foremost, that's where we start. And then we always, always, always want to limit our WIP or our work in progress, and that applies to MarTech as well. So limit your MarTech WIP. We don't want to roll out 17 new tools at the same time, right? We've talked about where can AI add the most value, and the same applies for all kinds of marketing technology. Where are you going to get the most value, the most bang for your buck? And if you don't have good workflow visualization, if you can't understand who is doing what across the entirety of your marketing function, that has got to be your first step. I will save you all kinds of soul searching and debate here. If you don't know that, you do that right now. First and foremost, go and get something as straightforward and simple as you can that will give you the information that you need. Depending on how big your team is, get as simple as you can to get the information that you need. So if you are like 10 marketers or fewer, Trello, Monday, something simple. If you're talking more like 30, 40, 50 marketers, you can probably still get away with Monday, maybe Trello. Asana is still going to work for you. Asana will take you pretty far, actually, and a pretty big into a pretty big organization. There's a lot of sophistication in these project management tools these days. You're just going to need to get really tight on how they are set up across teams. But just get a tool. You need a work visualization tool, project management tool. If you don't have one of those, that's your first step. Absolutely. And then you're also going to need some kind of planning system, right? A planning visualization tool. Miro, Mural, one of those kinds of guys. Also to be able to plan at a quarterly level across teams. So check those boxes first and foremost. Once you've got those, then we can start worrying about other things. And then, of course, you need basic marketing level tools, right? I'm assuming that you have things like CRM and marketing automation, if you're listening to this podcast. If you don't, then you absolutely need those as well. But, right, The hierarchy is pretty clear here. And in almost all things, simple is usually better, especially nowadays when almost everything is getting ever more sophisticated thanks to AI, right? Things that used to be kind of basic are getting a lot more interesting because AI is just leveling everything up super fast. Um, so get your basics in order before you start getting really clever and sophisticated. And I would say, while it is effective to go as simple as you can, we talked at the start about churn, and an that's not nothing. Switching tools is not nothing. So while you want to go as simple as you can right now, you also want to think about how big and complicated your team is likely to be in the future and how involved you want your stakeholders to be. So plan a little bit ahead of where you are now and think about that when you're buying tools. All right. The next thing that I would say is think about whether you can combine tool change and process change. I have clients sometimes get a little bit worried here and they feel like this is too much for their team to take on, but this is actually a form of limiting your work in progress because it's turning two changes into one change and allowing people to just roll it up into one thing and get it done at the same time. And it can let people just kind of think about it as one thing, sort of rip the Band-Aid off, and we get the change fatigue isolated and minimized. So especially if your change is like a project management tool or a workflow visualization tool, that is a great time, actually a great time, to also think about changing and evolving ways of working. So think about whether you can get some bang for your buck. If you're going to be changing one thing, can you change some other things as well and just minimize change fatigue? Likewise, can your tools fill multiple needs? If you're going to be doing a change anyway, can that tool solve other needs so that you won't have to do another change in 6 months? Limit your whip, limit your whip, limit your whip. All right. So MarTech is great. We all need it. It is super essential, but it is not the magic wand that's going to make everything perfect, right? We have to think about the root cause of the problem. Think about the process, think about the people, and think about the real changes that you're going to have to make. Because making changes to MarTech every 3, 6, 9 months is not the solution. You need a process foundation that will stay with you forever. And then MarTech can be a bonus. It can be a nice complement to that. So we need our MarTech, but the process that underpins it and the people that use the MarTech and the people that are the folks that run the process, all of these things have to work together to make the magic happen. MarTech is not the be all and end all. All right. So if you are concerned and not sure if your MarTech is helping or hurting at this point, we do have our free marketing agility scorecard that you can take. Technology and data are in there as a component, so you can find out whether they're helping or hurting at this point, and you'll find out how your team stacks up on things like speed and focus and effectiveness. You're going to get scores across 9 dimensions of the way that your marketing team works. It takes about 10 minutes, and you'll get a very clear picture of your team's overall health. We will share the link, as always, in the show notes. And of course, you can also find it at agileSherpas.com. Until next time, I'm your host, Andrea Fryrear. Don't forget, the struggle is real, but so is Agile marketing.